The lecture hall buzzed with the quiet shuffle of students settling into their seats. The room was massive, designed to accommodate beings of all sizes and shapes from across the galaxy. Floating platforms held students who preferred open air, while others sat in specially designed chairs that fit their unique anatomies. The walls were lined with displays showing star maps and historical images from various conflicts throughout galactic history. Maya Collins sat in the third row, her standard human chair looking almost plain compared to the elaborate seating around her. She was small compared to most of her classmates, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, her worn notebook open on her desk. She was one of only 3 humans in the entire academy, and the only human in this particular class on galactic military history. Instructor Vexthor entered through the main doorway, his massive frame commanding immediate attention. He was Krell, a species known throughout the galaxy for their military prowess and their rigid sense of order. His scales were a deep bronze color, and his eyes were sharp and calculating. He had served in the Krell military for 40 years before retiring to teach, and he carried himself with the bearing of someone who had seen real combat. Settle down, Vexthor said, his voice rumbling through the chamber. Today we continue our examination of the Third Expansion Wars. Specifically, we will discuss the human-Krell conflict, which concluded 50 years ago. Maya kept her expression neutral, though she felt the eyes of several classmates drift toward her. Being the subject of a history lesson while sitting in the classroom was an odd experience, but she had learned to endure it. She clicked her pen and prepared to take notes. Vexthor activated the main display, and images filled the wall behind him. Stars and planets appeared, along with ship formations and battle diagrams. The human conflict began when Earth, a relatively young spacefaring civilization, refused to acknowledge Krell territorial claims in the Outer Arm. They insisted on maintaining independent colonies in space we had already marked for expansion. A student in the back, a Threxian with multiple eye stalks, raised one appendage. Instructor, why did humans resist? Surely they knew they could not win against the Krell Empire. Vexthor nodded approvingly at the question. An excellent point. Humans are known for their stubbornness, their refusal to accept reality. They believed their primitive weapons and their determination could somehow overcome superior numbers and technology. They were, of course, wrong. Maya wrote in her notebook, her pen moving steadily across the page. She showed no reaction to the instructor's words. The display changed to show battle footage. Krell warships, massive and powerful, filled the screen. Smaller human vessels darted between them, firing weapons that seemed to barely scratch the Krell shields. The war lasted 8 years, Vexthor continued. 8 years of human resistance that cost both sides dearly. But the outcome was never in doubt. Human shipyards were destroyed. Their colonies were isolated. Their supply lines were cut. He pulled up an image of Earth itself, the blue and green planet looking small and vulnerable. Finally, the Krell fleet reached Earth. The human homeworld lay defenseless before us. They had no choice but to surrender. A Zellian student, her crystalline body refracting the light from the displays, spoke up. Did the humans fight to the last? I have heard they are fierce when defending their homes. No, Vexthor said. They were practical enough to recognize defeat when it came. Their leaders signed the surrender document, acknowledging Krell authority and agreeing to our terms. It was a complete and total victory for the Krell Empire. He brought up an image of the signing ceremony. Human diplomats in formal attire sat at a long table. Krell commanders standing over them. The scene looked grim and final. Maya studied it carefully, her expression still unreadable. The surrender was signed aboard the Krell flagship Dominator in orbit around Earth, Vexthor explained. The humans agreed to all our demands. They would cease all military operations. They would accept Krell governance of disputed territories. They would pay reparations for the cost of the war. It was a model surrender, comprehensive and absolute. Another student asked, "What happened to Earth after the surrender?" "They were allowed to maintain their own government, of course," Vexthor said. "The Krell Empire is not cruel. We simply required that they accept their proper place in the galactic order. They would not expand without permission. They would not build military vessels beyond a certain size. They would contribute to the Empire through trade and cooperation." Maya continued writing, filling page after page with notes. Around her, other students whispered to each other, occasionally glancing her way. She ignored them, focused on the lecture. Vexthor walked back and forth in front of the display, his tail swishing behind him. This conflict teaches us important lessons about power and reality. The humans learned that determination alone cannot overcome superior force. They learned that idealism must give way to practicality. They learned their place. He paused, looking around the classroom. His gaze passed over Maya without stopping. "Some species resist this lesson. They cling to pride even in defeat. But humans, to their credit, accepted reality. Since the surrender, they have been peaceful members of the galactic community. They contribute to trade, to culture, to scientific research. They have found a way to matter without military strength." The Threxian student spoke again. "Are humans happy with this arrangement? Do they resent the Krell?" Vexthor considered the question. "I cannot speak for all humans, of course. But the arrangement has lasted 50 years without major incident. Actions speak louder than words." "They have accepted the peace." Maya looked up from her notebook, meeting the instructor's eyes for a moment before returning to her writing. "The surrender document itself is a fascinating artifact," Vexthor continued, pulling up an image of the first page. The text was dense, written in both human languages and Krell script. It is comprehensive and detailed, covering every aspect of the post-war relationship. It took human lawyers weeks to draft it according to our specifications. He scrolled through the document on the screen, page after page of legal text. As you can see, it covers military limitations, territorial boundaries, trade obligations, and much more. It is a template that we have used in other conflicts since then. The Human Krell Surrender Document has become a model for how advanced civilizations should handle defeated opponents with dignity. The class period was nearly over. Students began to pack their materials, preparing for the next lecture. Vexthor started to close down the displays. "And thus," he concluded, "humanity learned its place in the galactic order. They fought with courage, but courage alone cannot change the mathematics of power. They surrendered with dignity, and they have lived peacefully ever since. It is a satisfactory ending to what could have been a much bloodier conflict." He moved to dismiss the class, but Maya's hand went up. It was the first time she had moved beyond taking notes during the entire lecture. Vexthor noticed and nodded toward her. "Yes, Collins? Do you have a question?" Maya stood, her notebook still open in her hands. Her voice was calm and clear, carrying easily through the lecture hall. "Instructor, I do have a question. Have you read the entire surrender document, including the final page?" The room went quiet. Every student turned to look at Maya, then at Vexthor. The instructor's expression shifted from mild attention to confusion, then to something that might have been annoyance. "Of course I have read it," he said, his voice stiffening. "I have studied that document extensively as part of my research into military history." "Why do you ask?" Maya met his gaze steadily. "Just curious, Instructor. I wanted to make sure we were all looking at the same document." Vexthor stood at the front of the classroom, his bronze scales catching the light from the displays. His expression had shifted from casual confidence to something harder, more defensive. The question from the small human student had clearly irritated him, though he was trying to maintain his professional composure. "I assure you, Collins, I have studied the surrender document in great detail, he said, his voice carrying an edge now. I have written papers on it. I have taught courses on it. I am considered an expert on the human Krell War throughout this academy. Maya remained standing, her notebook closed now. Several other students had stopped packing their bags, sensing that something interesting was happening. The Threxian student leaned forward on his platform, all of his eye stalks focused on the exchange. I meant no disrespect, Instructor, Maya said, her tone polite but firm. I simply wanted to clarify something. May I approach the display? Vex Thor's tail twitched with annoyance, but he gestured toward the front of the room. If you must. But make it quick. The next class will be arriving soon. Maya gathered her notebook and walked down the aisle toward the front. She moved with quiet confidence, not hurrying, but not hesitating either. When she reached the main console, she looked at Vexthor. May I? He stepped aside, crossing his arms across his chest. Go ahead. Show us whatever you think I have missed. Maya pulled up the surrender document again. The first page appeared on the massive wall display, the text clear and readable. She scrolled slowly through the pages, letting the class see each section. The students who had been preparing to leave settled back into their seats, curiosity overcoming their schedules. Here we have the opening statement, Maya said, pointing to the text. Earth acknowledges the military superiority of the Krell Empire and agrees to cease hostile actions. Standard surrender language. She scrolled further. Here are the territorial concessions. Earth gives up claim to 17 colony worlds and agrees not to settle in designated Krell expansion zones. Also standard. Vexthor uncrossed his arms, looking slightly less defensive. Yes, exactly as I described in the lecture. And here, Maya continued, still scrolling, are the military limitations. Earth agrees to cap its fleet size, restrict weapons development, and allow Krell inspectors to verify compliance. A Zellian student spoke up. This all sounds like a complete surrender. What are you trying to show us? Maya smiled slightly. Patience. I am getting there. She scrolled through more pages. Reparations payments, trade agreements. Cultural exchange programs, page after page of detailed legal text, all of it seeming to support Vexthor's version of events. The instructor began to relax, clearly thinking that Maya was wasting everyone's time. Collins, I fail to see your point, he said. Everything you are showing confirms exactly what I taught today. Almost there, Maya said, still scrolling. The page counter at the bottom of the screen showed they were near the end of the document. 50 pages. 60 pages. 70 pages. Then Maya stopped. The page on the screen was labeled differently from the others. Instead of the dense legal text, it had a simple header in both human and Krell languages. Appendix A. Terms of Human Compliance. The classroom went very quiet. Even Vexthor leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing as he read the header. I do not recall this section, he admitted, his voice careful now. Most people stop reading after the main surrender terms, Maya said. The appendix seems like just technical details. But the details matter, do they not? She began to read aloud, her voice carrying clearly through the silent classroom. Section 1. Humanity agrees to cease all military resistance against the Krell Empire, conditional upon full Krell implementation of the reforms and requirements listed in the following sections. Conditional upon? What does that mean? It means exactly what it says, Maya replied. The surrender was not unconditioned. It had conditions attached. She scrolled down, revealing the first list of conditions. Section 2, Clause 1. The Krell Empire agrees to abolish all forms of slavery and forced labor throughout its territory within 5 years of this agreement. A murmur went through the classroom. Several students looked at each other in confusion. Maya continued. Clause 2. The Krell Empire agrees to establish independent judicial systems on all member worlds, with judges selected by local populations rather than appointed by the central government. Wait, the Threxian student said, his voice excited. Those are laws in the Krell Empire. Those are real laws that exist right now. Clause 3, Maya read on. The Krell Empire agrees to grant all member species equal representation in imperial governance, with voting rights proportional to population. Vexthor was staring at the screen now, his confident demeanor completely gone. This cannot be right. This must be some kind of error in the document. Maya looked at him. Is it an error, Instructor? Or is it something that was always there, that everyone simply chose not to read? She scrolled further, revealing more clauses. Clause 4. All member species retain the right to their own cultural practices and languages, which cannot be suppressed by imperial decree. Clause 5. Workers throughout the Empire are guaranteed minimum wage standards, safe working conditions, and the right to organize for collective bargaining.
The Zellian student's crystalline body was flickering with agitation.
But those are all real things. Those are all actual laws in the Krell Empire. I learned about them in my civics class. Exactly, Maya said. Clause 6. The Krell Empire agrees to limit military expansion and seek diplomatic solutions before military action against newly contacted species. Clause 7. Independent media outlets must be permitted to operate throughout the Empire without government censorship. She kept scrolling. The clauses went on and on. Educational reforms. Environmental protections. Rights for subject species. Healthcare standards. Each one was detailed and specific, laying out exactly what the Krell Empire needed to do. Vexthor found his voice, though it was strained. Even if these clauses exist in the document, they are just demands. Surrendering nations always make demands. It does not mean those demands were met. Maya nodded. A fair point, Instructor. Let me check something. She pulled up a second window on the display, this one showing the current Krell legal code. She put it side by side with the surrender document. Then she began highlighting matching sections. The Slavery Abolition Clause matched word for word with a Krell law passed 6 months after the surrender. The Judicial Independence Clause matched a reform implemented 2 years later. The Equal Representation Clause matched the current structure of the Krell Senate. One by one, she showed how every single clause in the appendix had been implemented into actual Krell law. But that is just coincidence, Vexthor said, though his voice lacked conviction. The Krell Empire decided to make those reforms on its own. It had nothing to do with human demands. Kevin Park, another human student sitting near the back, raised his hand. Maya nodded toward him. Instructor, if I may, Kevin said, standing up. I wrote a paper last semester on Krell governmental reforms. I looked at the timing of when different laws were passed. Every single major reform in the Krell Empire over the past 50 years matches a clause in this appendix, and they were implemented in the exact order listed in the document. He pulled out his own tablet, projecting his data onto a side screen. A timeline appeared, showing Krell reforms on one side and the appendix clauses on the other. They lined up perfectly. The first reforms began 6 months after the surrender, Kevin continued. They continued steadily for 30 years. The final clause in the appendix, about environmental protections, was implemented into law exactly 20 years ago, which matches the timeline specified in the document. The classroom erupted in whispered conversations. Students turned to each other, their voices rising in confusion and excitement. The Threxian student was waving his appendages, trying to get his neighbor's attention. The Zellian student's body was pulsing with bright, agitated light. Vexthor raised his voice over the noise. Quiet. Everyone quiet. The room settled, but the energy remained. Every eye was on the instructor, waiting to see how he would respond. Maya remained at the front, standing beside the display with both documents still visible. She looked at Vexthor, her expression serious, but not confrontational. "Instructor," she said quietly, "may I ask you a question?" Vexthor looked at her, his scales seeming duller than they had at the start of class. "What question?" Maya gestured at the screens. "If humanity lost the war, if we surrendered completely and unconditionally, why did the Krell Empire change everything we asked them to change?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Vexthor opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. His claws tapped against his scaled arms as he crossed them tighter against his chest. The confident military historian from the beginning of class had been replaced by someone who looked genuinely uncertain for the first time. "The reforms were Krell ideas," he finally said, but his voice lacked the authority it had carried earlier. "The Empire decided to modernize its governance. It was a natural evolution of our society." Maya nodded slowly, as if considering his words. A natural evolution that just happened to match, point by point, a list of demands in a surrender document that nobody bothered to read completely? She turned back to the display and scrolled further into the appendix. "There are 247 clauses total, Instructor. Each one specifies exactly what the Krell Empire needed to do." Each one has a timeline attached, and according to Kevin's research, each one was implemented exactly as written. The Threxian student raised an appendage again. But why would the Krell accept such terms? If they won the war, why would they agree to change their entire government? "An excellent question," Maya said. She pulled up another document, this one showing Krell High Command meeting records from 50 years ago. "These records were declassified 10 years ago. May I read a portion?" Vexthor said nothing, so Maya took his silence as permission. "This is from a meeting held 3 days after Earth transmitted the surrender document," she began. "Commander Thexrel is speaking. He says, the humans have put us in an impossible position. If we reject their terms, we must continue the war. Our analysts estimate another 5 years of combat to fully subdue Earth, with massive casualties on both sides." She scrolled to another section. "Here," Admiral Kreftos responds. "If we destroy Earth entirely, the other species in the galaxy will see us as monsters. We have worked for generations to build the Empire through strength and honor, not genocide. Destroying an entire homeworld would undo all of that." Kevin stood up again from his seat in the back. "And if I may add, Instructor, there is a third option discussed in those meetings. It is on page 47 of the declassified documents." Maya nodded and found the page. "General Voxmeyer says we could accept their conditional surrender. Publicly, we claim total victory. We got Earth to stop fighting, which is what we wanted. Privately, we implement the reforms they demand. Many of them are things our own progressive factions have been requesting for years." A new voice joined the conversation. A Krell student named Thexlar, sitting in the front row, stood up. His scales were a lighter color than Vexthor's, marking him as younger. His voice shook slightly as he spoke. "They trapped you," Thexlar said, looking at Vexthor. "The humans trapped the Empire. They could not win the war, so they made sure their surrender was more valuable than their defeat." Vexthor turned sharply toward his fellow Krell. "That is absurd. The Krell Empire does not get trapped by inferior species." "Then explain the timeline," Vexlar shot back, his confidence growing. "Explain why every reform matches the human document." "Explain why it took exactly 30 years to implement all 247 clauses, which is exactly the timeline the appendix specified." Maya pulled up another screen, this one showing economic data. The cost of the war was enormous for both sides. Earth lost 17 colonies and most of its military fleet. But the Krell Empire spent 8 years fighting a species that refused to give up. Every battle was expensive. Every occupied territory required resources to hold. She highlighted specific numbers. By the time the Krell fleet reached Earth, the Empire had spent more on the war than they would gain from controlling human territory. The war had become economically unsustainable. Kevin added more information from his seat, and Earth knew this. Human intelligence had been monitoring Krell economic reports throughout the war. They knew exactly when the Empire reached the breaking point. That is when they transmitted the surrender offer. The Zellian student spoke up, her voice filled with wonder. So the surrender was designed to give the Krell a way to stop fighting without losing face. They could claim victory while actually giving humans everything they wanted. Not everything, Maya corrected. Earth did lose territory. Humans did accept military limitations. People died in that war, on both sides. The cost was real. But the strategic goal was never to win militarily. It was to reshape the Krell Empire from within. She pulled up another set of documents. Here are internal Earth government communications from before the war even started. The Human Diplomatic Corps had been studying the Krell Empire for years. They identified the weaknesses in Krell society, the slave populations that resented their status, the subject species that wanted more autonomy, the Krell citizens who disagreed with imperial expansion. Vexthor was staring at the screens now, reading the documents with growing disbelief. You are saying the war was planned? That Earth wanted to lose. Not wanted to lose, Maya said carefully. Knew they would lose. There is a difference. Earth could not match Krell military power. That was obvious from the start. So human strategists asked a different question. If we cannot win the war, can we win the peace? She brought up a quote from a human general, displayed large on the screen. General Lisa Torres wrote this in her private journal, 2 years before the war began. We cannot defeat the Krell in battle, but we can make them into what we need them to be. We can make them into an empire worth surrendering to. Kevin stood again, his excitement evident. The entire war was a negotiation. Every battle Earth fought demonstrated their willingness to resist. Every colony they evacuated showed they could sustain a long conflict. Every ambush and guerrilla action proved that occupying Earth would be a nightmare. And then, Maya continued, when the Krell were exhausted and ready for peace, Earth offered them a surrender that looked like total victory, but was actually a complete restructuring of their society. Thexar sat down slowly, his mind clearly racing, and the Empire accepted because rejecting it would mean admitting that a defeated species had outwitted them. Exactly, Maya said. Once the surrender was signed, once the Krell announced their great victory, they were committed. They could not go back without looking foolish. So they implemented the reforms quietly, one clause at a time, over 30 years. The Threxian student was vibrating with excitement on his platform. By the time anyone realized what had happened, the entire Krell Empire had been transformed. Former slaves were free. Subject species had rights. The government was more democratic. And humans, the Zellian student added, humans were embedded throughout the new system as advisors and diplomats and teachers. They lost the war, but became indispensable to the peace. Vexthor walked to his desk and sat down heavily. His tail lay still behind him, no longer swishing with confidence. How did I not see this? How did none of us see this? Maya's expression softened. Because you saw what you wanted to see, Instructor. The Krell Empire won the war. That is true. Earth surrendered. That is also true. Everything else was buried in details that seemed unimportant. She pulled up one final document. This is from a human diplomatic training manual, written 5 years after the surrender. It says, when dealing with proud warrior cultures, remember that how you lose matters as much as whether you lose. A surrender can be a weapon if wielded correctly. Kevin walked down to join Maya at the front of the classroom. The manual goes on to say, the Krell believe they conquered Earth, Let them believe it. We gained everything we actually needed. We freed millions of slaves. We brought democracy to dozens of worlds. We transformed an empire. That we did it by surrendering instead of winning is irrelevant. The classroom was completely silent now. Every student was processing what they had learned, their understanding of history shifting beneath them. Vexthor looked up at Maya and Kevin. Why are you telling us this? Why reveal it now? Maya smiled. Because 50 years have passed, Instructor. The reforms are permanent now. The Empire will not go back to what it was. The truth cannot hurt the peace anymore. And because students deserve to learn real history, not comfortable stories. She closed the documents and stepped back from the console. Earth did not win the war, but we won something more important. We won the future, the silence in the classroom stretched on. Students sat frozen in their seats, their minds working through the implications of what they had just learned. Vexthor remained at his desk, staring at nothing in particular, his worldview visibly crumbling around him. Finally, a student near the back raised a tentacle hesitantly. Her name was Zelnara, a species known for their analytical thinking. I still do not understand something. If the Krell military command saw what the humans were doing, why did they accept it? Surely they could have rejected the surrender and continued fighting. Maya nodded, acknowledging the question. They could have. But let me show you what their options actually looked like. She pulled up a new display, creating 3 columns of text. The Krell High Command faced 3 realistic choices after receiving Earth's conditional surrender. Each choice had consequences. The first column lit up. Option 1. Reject the surrender and continue the war until Earth was completely destroyed or occupied. Kevin read from his tablet. Krell military projections estimated this would take another 3 to 7 years. Casualties would be extreme on both sides. The Krell economy was already strained. Multiple subject species were watching to see how the Empire treated a defeated enemy, and Earth had made it clear they would never stop resisting. Maya added more details. Human resistance cells had already been established on every settled human world. Even if the Krell took Earth itself, they would face decades of guerrilla warfare. Humans had studied the Krell occupation of other species and learned from their mistakes. Every Krell soldier on a human world would need constant protection. Every supply line would be vulnerable. Every collaborator would be a target. She pulled up casualty estimates. The Krell military calculated they would lose approximately 40% of their remaining fleet, securing Earth and holding it for just the first 5 years. And that assumed humans fought conventionally, which all intelligence suggested they would not. Thexlar spoke up again, his voice thoughtful. So continuing the war would have been extremely costly, with no guarantee of a stable peace afterward. Correct, Maya said. Now, option 2, the second column illuminated. Destroy Earth completely. Use orbital bombardment to make the planet uninhabitable and eliminate humanity as a threat. A shocked gasp went through several students. The Zellian student's crystalline body flashed bright red. That would be genocide. That would be against every galactic convention. Exactly, Kevin said. And the Krell Empire had spent generations building its reputation. They were conquerors, yes, but they were not monsters. They followed rules of war. They treated defeated enemies with a certain dignity. Destroying an entire homeworld, killing billions of civilians, would mark them as something different. Something terrible. Maya pulled up diplomatic communications from other galactic powers during the war. The Vren Federation was watching closely. The Talaxian Union had expressed concerns. Even species that were not involved in the conflict were paying attention. If the Krell destroyed Earth, every other species would see them as an existential threat. Alliances would form against them. The Empire would face isolation, or worse. She scrolled through more documents. And there was an internal problem, too. Many Krell citizens were uncomfortable with the war. The progressive faction in the Krell Senate had been growing for years. They wanted reform. They wanted the Empire to be something more than just a military machine. Genocide would strengthen the hardliners, but it would also create deep divisions within Krell society itself. Vexthor finally spoke, his voice quiet. So destroying Earth would have destroyed the Empire's reputation and created internal chaos. That option was politically impossible. Which left option 3, Maya said, lighting up the final column. Accept the conditional surrender. She pulled up the internal Krell debate records again, showing a longer section this time. General Voxmar made the argument most clearly. He told the High Command that accepting the surrender gave them everything they actually needed. Earth would stop fighting. Humans would acknowledge Krell authority. The Empire could declare victory and move on. Kevin walked to stand beside the display. And the conditions Earth demanded? Many of them were things the Krell reformers had wanted for years. Ending slavery had been debated in the Senate for decades. Giving subject species more rights had popular support among younger Krell. The reforms were not really human ideas. They were Krell ideas that humans were forcing the Empire to finally implement. A student named Pixtal, whose species had been conquered by the Krell 100 years earlier, raised a claw. So the humans used the surrender to give Krell reformers the push they needed. The conservatives and the government could not oppose the reforms without admitting the surrender was not actually a victory. Precisely, Maya said. It was political brilliance. The Krell military got to claim they won the war. The Krell conservatives got to save face, and the Krell reformers got the changes they wanted. Everyone won something, except the humans lost colonies and people, the Zellian student pointed out. Maya's expression became serious.
Yes.
The cost was real. Over 2 million humans died in the war. 17 colonies were abandoned, and families lost their homes. Earth's military was reduced to a fraction of its former size. These were not small sacrifices. She pulled up memorial records, showing names and faces of those who had died. Every person who fought in that war believed they were defending humanity's future. They were not told they were going to lose. They fought with real courage against impossible odds. Their sacrifice was genuine, and it mattered. Kevin added quietly, the strategy only worked because humans were willing to fight hard enough to make the Krell take the surrender seriously. If Earth had given up easily, the Krell would have just ignored the conditions and imposed their own terms. The blood and loss gave the surrender its power. Thexelar stood up again, pacing now. So the humans calculated that losing the war on their terms was better than fighting to the end and getting nothing. They traded military defeat for political victory. And 50 years later, Maya said, pulling up current statistics, the results speak for themselves. She displayed population data for former Krell slave species. Slavery was eliminated throughout the Empire.
Approximately 3 billion beings were freed over a 20-year period. These populations now have citizenship rights, education, and economic opportunity.
More data appeared. Subject species that once had no voice in government now elect representatives to the Krell's Senate. Laws are made with their input. Their cultures are protected rather than suppressed. Kevin added his own research. Worker protections have raised living standards across the Empire. Independent courts have reduced corruption. Press freedom has allowed criticism of government policies. The Krell Empire today is fundamentally different from what it was 50 years ago. And humans, Maya continued, are now integrated throughout this new empire. Human diplomats serve on dozens of worlds. Human teachers, staff schools, across Krell space. Human engineers, help build infrastructure. Human doctors train medical staff. She pulled up immigration statistics. Over the past 50 years, more than 500 million humans have moved to live and work in former Krell territory, not as conquered people, but as equal citizens with full rights. The Threxian student was processing all of this, his eye stalks moving independently as he thought.
So the humans lost the war but won the peace. They could not defeat the Krell military, so they transformed the Krell Empire into something they could live with.
Something everyone could live with, Maya corrected. The reforms benefited every species in the Empire, not just humans. That was part of the design. Earth did not ask for special treatment or revenge. They asked for justice and equality for everyone. Pixtal spoke again, emotion clear in his voice. My grandparents were slaves before the reforms. They lived in camps and worked without pay and had no rights. Now my family owns land and I can attend this academy. The humans did that.
Their surrender freed my people. Other students began to speak up, sharing their own stories.
The Zellian student talked about how her world gained autonomy. A Vrelian student described how independent courts protected his family from corrupt officials. One by one, students realized how the human surrender had changed their own lives. Vex Thor listened to all of this, his expression unreadable. Finally, he stood up and walked back to the display. He stood beside Maya and Kevin, looking at the data they had shown. I have taught military history for 15 years, he said slowly. I have studied hundreds of conflicts. I thought I understood war and victory and defeat. He turned to face the class. But I never asked the most important question. What is victory actually for? The Krell won every battle. We destroyed the human fleet. We forced Earth to surrender.
But what did we actually win? He gestured at the screens. We won the right to change everything about ourselves.
We won the chance to become better. The humans lost the war and gained a better empire to live in. We won the war and gained the same thing. Maya smiled slightly. So who really won, Instructor? Vexthor looked at her for a long moment. Perhaps everyone did. Or perhaps the question itself is wrong. The conversation in the classroom continued as more students began to understand the full scope of what had happened 50 years ago. The initial shock was giving way to deeper questions, and the students were no longer passive listeners. They were active participants in rewriting their understanding of history. A student named Corden, a Vrelian with deep purple skin, raised his hand. But why do humans allow the narrative to continue? Why let everyone believe Earth lost when the truth is so much more complex? Maya exchanged a glance with Kevin before answering. Because the narrative serves the peace. Think about what would happen if the Krell Empire officially acknowledged that they were outmaneuvered by a defeated species. How would that affect Krell pride? How would hardliners react? Kevin nodded. The reforms are now permanent. They have been in place for 50 years. An entire generation has grown up with freedom and rights that did not exist before. Trying to undo them would cause massive unrest. But if the Empire had to admit publicly that humans tricked them into these reforms, it would create political chaos. So humans stay quiet, Maya continued. We let the Krell say they won. We let the history books say Earth surrendered unconditionally. We do not correct the narrative because correcting it would only cause harm. Axlar looked troubled. But is that not dishonest? Should history not be truthful? History is always complicated, Maya said. The Krell did win the military conflict. That is true. Earth did surrender. That is also true. Everything else is interpretation. We choose to interpret it as a defeat because that interpretation protects the peace. She pulled up a quote on the display. "This is from President Chen, who led Earth during the surrender negotiations." She said,
Pride is cheap. Justice is precious.
"If we must swallow our pride to gain justice for billions of beings across the galaxy, then pride is a small price to pay." The Zellian student's crystalline body pulsed with soft blue light, indicating contemplation. "So, human strategy was not just about the war. It was about the next 50 years, the next 100 years. It was about building something that would last."
Exactly, Kevin said.
"Short term, humans lost territory and military power. Long term, we gained something much more valuable. We gained a galaxy where justice and equality are spreading. We gained a civilization where different species can live together as genuine equals."
Vexthor had been listening quietly, but now he spoke up. "There is something I still do not understand. How did human leaders convince their own people to accept this?"
"Surely many humans wanted revenge. Many must have wanted to keep fighting." Maya's expression became more serious. "That is the hardest part of the story, Instructor. President Chen faced enormous opposition. Many humans did want to fight to the end. They saw the surrender as cowardice, as betrayal." She pulled up historical footage from Earth during the surrender negotiations. Protests filled the streets. Angry crowds demanded that the government keep fighting. Military officers resigned rather than accept defeat. The debate nearly tore human society apart. Chen was called a traitor. Her advisors received death threats. Some military units refused to stand down even after the surrender was signed. Kevin added more context, but Chen and her team spent months explaining the strategy to human leadership. They showed the projections. They demonstrated that continuing the war would only lead to Earth's destruction, and they made a promise. They promised that the surrender would not be the end of human influence. It would be the beginning. And she was right, Maya said, but it took years for most humans to see it. The first generation after the surrender was bitter. They had lost homes and loved ones. They had been forced to accept defeat. It was not until the reforms started taking effect, until they saw slavery ending and democracy spreading, that humans began to understand what had been achieved. She pulled up survey data from Earth over the decades. 20 years after the surrender, 60% of humans still viewed it as a defeat. 30 years after, that number dropped to 40%. Today, 50 years later, most humans understand the surrender as a strategic victory, even if they do not say it publicly. Pixtall spoke again, his voice full of emotion.
"My people honor the human surrender. We celebrate it as the day our freedom began."
"In my culture, we have a saying now. Sometimes the wisest warrior sheaths their sword." Other students began sharing similar perspectives. Species after species described how their worlds had changed for the better because of the reforms that followed Earth's surrender. The Threxian student talked about educational opportunities that had not existed before. A Qualian student described environmental protections that saved her homeworld from industrial destruction. Vexthor listened to all of this, and something in his bearing changed. The defensive pride was gone, replaced by genuine reflection. "I have been teaching the wrong lesson," he said quietly. "I have been teaching that military victory is the ultimate goal, but these stories show that military victory is only a means to an end. What matters is what comes after." He looked at Maya directly. "You asked me if I had read the final page of the surrender document. I had not. I had read the parts that confirmed what I wanted to believe, and ignored the rest. That was my failure as a historian, and as a teacher." Maya inclined her head respectfully.
"We all see what we expect to see, Instructor. The important thing is being willing to look again when new evidence appears."
The class was nearly over now, the period having run well beyond its scheduled time. No one seemed to notice or care. The next class was gathering outside the doors. but this conversation felt too important to interrupt.
Cordan asked one final question.
What happens now? Do we tell others what we learned today? Do we try to change how this history is taught? Maya considered this carefully. That is up to each of you. The information is not secret.
The documents are all public. Anyone who takes the time to read carefully can find what we found today.
But remember what I said about the narrative serving the piece,
Kevin elaborated. You can share this knowledge. You can discuss it with others, but do it thoughtfully. Do not use it to humiliate the Krell or to claim human superiority. Use it to understand that victory and defeat are more complicated than they appear. Use it to appreciate that sometimes losing is winning. Fexar stood up, his voice firm. I will tell others.
My people need to know that the Empire changed because it was the right thing to do. Not because we were forced into it. The reforms happened because good Krell saw the justice in them.
That is also true, Maya agreed. The reforms could not have happened without Krell's support. Humans wrote the conditions, but Krell citizens implemented them. Krell reformers fought for them. Krell workers and soldiers made them real. It was a collaboration, even if it started as a surrender. Vexthor walked to the front of the room and stood before the class. I will be revising this course.
Next semester, we will examine the Human-Krell War in its full complexity. We will read the entire surrender document, including the appendix.
We will look at how military defeat can serve strategic goals, and we will discuss what victory actually means. He looked at Maya and Kevin. I would appreciate it if you two would guest lecture for those sessions. Your perspective is valuable, and I clearly have more to learn. Both human students nodded their acceptance. The students began to gather their belongings, but the energy in the room had completely changed from the beginning of class. They talked excitedly among themselves, sharing thoughts and questions. Many approached Maya and Kevin to ask for copies of the documents they had referenced. As the classroom finally emptied, Maya and Kevin remained behind with Vexthor. The instructor looked at the display, still showing the final page of the surrender document.
I have one more question, Vexthor said.
What would you have done if the Krell had rejected the conditional surrender? If we had chosen to destroy Earth rather than accept your terms? Maya was quiet for a moment.
Then Earth would have been destroyed and humanity would have ended. The strategy was a gamble.
It relied on the Krell being who we believed they were. Honorable warriors who valued their reputation. A species capable of choosing wisdom over rage. She smiled slightly. President Chen said something about that too. She said, We are betting everything on the hope that our enemies are better than they think they are. And she was right. You were better. The Empire chose the harder path, the better path. Kevin added, That is why humans do not gloat about the surrender. Yes, we achieved our strategic goals, but we also genuinely respect what the Krell Empire became. The reforms required courage and sacrifice from Krell citizens, too. It was not just a human victory. It was everyone's victory.
Vexthor turned off the displays and gathered his materials. Thank you for this lesson.
I came to class today thinking I would teach history. Instead, I learned it.
As they walked toward the exit, Maya paused at the doorway. Outside, carved into the wall, was a memorial plaque. She had passed it hundreds of times, but had never really looked at it closely. Now she stopped and read the inscription. The Human-Krell War, Year Zero of the New Era, in memory of all who fought and fell. Below that, in smaller text, was a line in both human and Krell languages.
From conflict came understanding. From surrender came freedom.
From loss came hope. Maya reached out and touched the cool metal gently. Kevin stood beside her, reading the same words.
Year 0 of the new era, Kevin said softly. They did not even realize they were marking the beginning of something new.
They knew, Maya said. Whoever carved this knew exactly what they were marking. Vex Thor joined them at the memorial.
I have walked past this plaque every day for 15 years. I always thought it was just acknowledging the end of the war, but it says new era, not end of war.
Because the surrender was not an ending, Maya said. It was a beginning. She turned away from the memorial and looked at her instructor.
We did not surrender, Instructor. We negotiated.
And 50 years later, the galaxy is better for it. As they walked down the corridor together, human students and Krell teachers side by side, the truth of those words was evident in every interaction around them. Different species studying together, former enemies working as colleagues. A galaxy slowly learning that strength comes in many forms, and sometimes the bravest thing a warrior can do is choose peace. The war was over. The new era continued, and history, properly understood, showed that sometimes losing was the greatest victory of all.